Hi everyone, this is Justin Gray from Synthesis Sound and Immersive Mastering, and this video is going to be dedicated to exploring a number of approaches to producing music in Dolby Atmos based on my own experience working with artists over the last number of years. Just as a quick introduction, I encourage you to visit www.synthesissound.com to learn more about my studio, more about my work within this format, within Sony 360 and stereo as a mix engineer, and www.immersivemastering.com, where you can learn more about my specific practices as a mastering engineer. Of course, if you enjoy the YouTube content, please subscribe to the channel. There's a number of other videos already available that I've shared in the past, and I look forward to sharing more with you. So please, let's connect. So, why make this video? Why now? The intent is so important in everything that we do. There is so much momentum at this very moment specifically in the Dolby Atmos world. And from my own perspective, I started this 5 years ago. And it has actually been a very linear process, a very logical process to where we are today from my perspective. But as with all things, especially in our sort of current, modern commercial times, things are not always linear. And I do believe that we're reaching a point of critical mass where the interest and knowledge around this format is starting to really spread at a rapid pace. It's a good thing. But with that power, which is now starting to find its way into many different avenues of media as we know it, comes a significant amount of responsibility. And I think that for our community to be able to handle that responsibility, and ultimately the responsibility is to the music, there's a lot of considerations. And so I look forward in this video to sharing some of those considerations from a production standpoint. And for those of you who know my content, it's also going to include some aesthetic and philosophical discussion as well. A little backstory. I started in Dolby Atmos 5 years ago, a little over 5 years ago. The landscape was extremely different at that time. I'm an independent studio owner here in Toronto. And at that time, setting up to be a Dolby Atmos facility at the level that I wanted, which was to be a mastering level facility, even though I'm primarily mixing, as we all are, I'm a stereo mastering engineer. I have been for a decade. And so my philosophy was always to make sure that the system was at that level. And we all know the risks and the financial burden that is associated with putting this many speakers, this many DACs, this many cables. And, I was one of the early adopters of a Pro Tools Matrix. So many things that had to happen for that to happen. And I want to stress that 5 years ago, Dolby Atmos was only truly available at a commercial level, in film, of course, but musically, it only starts to make itself available on Blu-ray. And still to this day, Dolby True HD on Blu-ray is the most glorious way for a home consumer listener to experience this format. My background as a stereo mastering engineer, and prior to that, even just as a stereo mixing engineer, I was always enamored with surround. I've been sort of a closet audiophile for surround, and I have a huge SACD collection, Blu-ray collection, listening to 5.1 discs. I have old quad discs. As soon as Atmos came into the foray with Blu-ray, especially the things out of Europe and classical recordings, etc. As a listener, I was already well aware of it and only dreamed of the opportunity to be able to make music that way. And so actually I had a 5.1 setup. I'll tell a brief story. I had a 5.1 setup of Atoms at that time. My whole setup now is Lipinski L707s and then height channels and big subs. But anyways, at that time I had 5 Atom S2Xs and an Atom sub sort of flanking my stereo Lipinski system. And I had to make a very challenging decision one day when I had the opportunity to get a 5.1 setup from Poland, from a great engineer over there, that would now flush my setup to be, 7.1 in Lipinski's. And I had to make some extremely dangerous, to be perfectly honest, financial moves to get the money together, sell my Atoms literally as fast as possible so that I could just reach the ability to afford, and I'm going to put quotation marks on that one, getting the Lipinskis in here. And at that time, there was no commercial outlet for Dolby Atmos if you weren't already working essentially in the classical world, which is completely unattainable to me. So why? Why do it? For me, it's the same reason why I do it today. Because I can't imagine not making music in an immersive context. It just makes sense to me personally. And it's purely aesthetic. It truly is a personal feeling. I think that that's very important to stress for everybody who is discovering Dolby Atmos for the first time today, is that even though the landscape is drastically different, all of this should always be driven by artistic intent. And so sort of where this story and where maybe the next few minutes of this video is going to go is sort of trying to ground us at a time where the industry is pushing fast and encouraging a lot of people to spend a lot of money. And, there's all sorts of angles to it, and I just like to share my own perspective. So fast forward a little bit. I was working on Dolby Atmos content as soon as the renderer was available. To be honest with you, anyone who's been in Atmos since the beginning, on the music side, of course, knows who Carrie Thomas is, and Carrie worked at Dolby. Here in Toronto, I was working on Atmos, trying to learn and develop an aesthetic and abilities within the format and work through all the brutal technology stuff in the beginning, all on my own. It's at the same time that Dolby and UMG were doing the incredible work with Steve Jenowick and Carrie and the whole team in LA, and I'm just watching from a distance. There's basically a whole team down in LA, and I felt like I was on an island all on my own. So one day I sort of pretended that I was going to start a soundstage calling Dolby until finally I could get through to Carrie. And the minute I got on the phone, I said, "Carrie, this is who I am. I'm definitely not setting up a soundstage, but I just want to talk to you. I want to explain what it is that I'd like to do and why I want to do this." And he was just the best. Just brought me in and would get on the phone with me and help get things through. There was the spec, all of that stuff that was being designed at that time. And so it was an honor to get to work through some of that stuff sort of from a distance. Then I saw Tidal take it on. Ooh, that one, the feeling of like, finally, it's happening. The industry is taking it on, because I always knew in my gut that it just makes sense. We're going to talk about that. This format just makes sense, not because you can put sound all around you, but for even more specific technological reasons. And so, huge leap of faith. But then I saw Tidal take it on. Oh, this is it. I mean, I'm not saying Tidal didn't do a great job, and still does. They do a great job. They really do. I had an Apple TV into a whole receiver system. I could listen to those first weekend mixes come out. This is it. It's the phone must start ringing. No, didn't happen. It was a totally closed loop. Maybe 100 titles got done. They were all done really nicely. Of course, Rocket Man at that time with Greg Penny and all, there was a big little momentum of like, yes, everyone's going to get it. Crickets. Then I literally sat here and worked on music, worked on my own music, worked on other people's music with no real even commercial. Honestly, the ability to even get a file on Tidal was still a complete mystery. And I know now, that it wasn't an option for an independent at that time. It was a closed loop, and understandably so. So I remember about a year before, 6 months before Apple took it on, I said to myself, it's Apple or Spotify. It's Apple or Spotify. And in my gut, I think I knew it was Apple. I don't know why. There was, I was in conversation with really smart people, and the inkling was towards Apple. Waiting, developing things. And then it happened. One day, I picked up my iPhone, and Spatial Audio had arrived. There's that video that Zayn put out with the Marvin Gaye. I remember it. Streamed it. Oh my gosh. And that was the day that Dolby Atmos started to get its notoriety as a music format. I might be telling a story that many people know, but a number of people might not totally get this trajectory and feel like, oh my gosh, today, this is the day. I don't like dating YouTube videos, but Universal Audio just released something. It's finally happening. No, this has been a process. It's been a long, from my perspective, a drawn out process that took a lot longer than I would have ever liked. I sweat. I was sweating here, to be perfectly honest. And it was at that time that I can't express my gratitude enough to the artists, to the producers, to the labels who I still work with today, I absolutely adore working with, that the momentum began. And since that time, like I said, I'm about 600 songs in. I work on Atmos every day, every night. 360 as well, and stereo mastering as well, but I'll keep this focused. And so I just wanted to provide that little story for two key reasons. The first is intent. I'm not going to point at any videos, but there's a video that I saw recently, very recently, that suggested that the intent for getting into Dolby Atmos was to not lose money. And that does not feel right to me. The intent here has to be musical. It has to be. Because quite frankly, as exciting as Atmos is, as much music is going on, as much energy as Apple's putting into it, and Amazon and Tidal, and in the future, my guess will be Spotify. Stereo eclipses this format. Let's be honest with ourselves. First of all, stereo is the bar. It is the bar for music. It has decades and decades of the greatest music. I don't care about the format, just the music itself. And yes, legacy content is being reimagined in these formats. I work on it. Lots of people do some great things with it. It's beautiful. I'm so excited about that. But the idea to put it out there that right now a stereo engineer or a stereo producer or somebody composing music should have the burden and the pressure of, if you don't have 12 speakers around you, you're done, is absurd. And again, I am an early Dolby. I am converted. I am now working, very soon I'll be working in 11.1.6. Like, I'm fully converted, but I still master a lot in stereo. And the majority of the music that's being designed in this moment in the world, not the majority, the overwhelming majority, is being designed and conceived in stereo. Now, that's where this video is eventually going to go, is talking about ways to use immersive to expand ourselves, because that's the beauty. But the beauty is not in someone said I have to do it, so I'm going to do it. That is not the right reason to do it. It's not. And in my opinion, because even if Dolby Atmos, and I want it to happen, let's be perfectly frank, I want the development to happen. I want Dolby Atmos because I believe in it. I love how it sounds. I love working with it. But I loved working with it before there was any work to do. And so at this stage, I can't stress enough to those who are seeing these conversations around stereos being put to the side. It's just not substantiated. Now, will object-based audio, does it have the ability to become the master deliverable approach to music in the future? I will go on my own instincts and say yes. And remember, Dolby Atmos is an object-based immersive audio format. The object-based part is truly the key, in the sense that it is a channel adaptive format, no longer discrete. But let's be perfectly frank that there is nothing stopping various media formats today from delivering that content in stereo using objects, delivering it in 5.1 using objects, delivering it in quad using objects. The sky is the limit for what essentially that digital cube, because Dolby Atmos is Cartesian, where Sony is the opposite. But anyways, that digital cube is. And so I'm going to talk about this in a later video that's specifically dedicated to mastering practices today, but we have to check ourselves on remembering that Dolby Atmos at its core is not a 7.14 format. It's not a 9.1.4 format. It's not an 11.1 or 11.2.6 format. It is an object-based immersive audio format that is adaptive to the available channels. That includes our headphones, that includes our soundbars, that includes our wireless systems and all the awesome stuff coming out from Apple, Sonos, all of it. And so on the engineering side, when we get stuck thinking 714, I have these speakers, I'd better use them. We're putting the technology ahead of the music in our minds. And so to ground this again, I'm hoping that sharing this is helping to sort of counter that energy that I saw really recently of saying like stereo's done, Atmos is the only thing going forward. Look, there's a lot of logic and yes, certainly following object-based delivery is something that everyone needs to be deeply aware of. But we have to put it in perspective. And I'll say it the last time is just to stress that anybody who is feeling some sudden crazy financial pressure to put themselves at significant risk to just have 12 speakers because otherwise they can't make music, no, can't get behind the idea. And I don't think Dolby would get behind the idea either. I know the teams at Dolby. I know the people. These are smart, caring, lovely people who truly, they care about music. The same with the Sony team. They care about music. Now, of course, they love immersive audio. Let's roll back to where this all starts. Film. It's a 10-year-old format. The film industry has paved this whole way for us. And then we got in at that halfway point at 5 years. And then realistically, it's only been about 2 years since, even more than a handful of people were even doing it. So I hope you're able to pull something from that. My intent, again, is just to help ground the situation and provide context for where we are today and context for those statements. Now on to some production, as I promised. Anyone who watches, my YouTube content knows that, I'm just going to speak what I care about and speak what I'm passionate about. And they're not the shortest videos of all time. This album, Jonathan Kawchuk, Everywhen. I was put in touch with Jonathan, who's from the West Coast in Canada, through Carrie Thomas. Thank you, Carrie. Jonathan had conceived this music completely in headphones, but composed, captured, produced, and the whole situation conceived it for an immersive space. Realistically, even before Dolby Atmos was like a functional option for delivering music. When we first talked, we considered just releasing a binaural version of it because Atmos hadn't even announced being able to do what not even a third of what it does today for consumers. So we were going to do a Blu-ray, and then we were going to just release the binaural version until something happened. Like Tidal and Apple happened during the making of this album. So just to give context, there was another video I watched this week that suggested that it might be the first time that music was being produced for Dolby Atmos. Anybody who wants to study the trajectory of this format needs to get a Blu-ray player and needs to start buying Blu-ray, because this has been around for quite some time and there has been a significant body of work produced specifically for this format for years. This will be the first one that I draw attention to. This is available on Apple. It's available on Tidal. It's available on Amazon. I encourage you deeply to listen to it. It's something else. This is not a pop music record. Jonathan recorded 11-channel soundscapes in the Rocky Mountains with remote rigs. He recorded individual vocalists and composed a vocal tapestry. Again, all conceived in headphones, but then when we got connected, it was very, very early for me in the Dolby Atmos side. And Jonathan came to me. He was abroad, so we did this all like at the advent of audio movers and Zoom. I had a computer here where he could watch me working. Some of the songs he delivered for this record included, everything he delivered was a polywave, and it was an 11-channel polywave. So 7.4 because the LFE was not recorded acoustically, of course. In some cases, he delivered up to 60 of those polywaves. So I was working with Pro Tools sessions with 400, 500 tracks. The routing of it alone was gargantuan. And just to conceive of how this would work, I actually went to the end of the process first, which was Stefan Bach, who is the owner and manager at Pure Audio Blu-ray. And he was the only person that we could, that both of us had a great admiration for. I still do, of course. Absolutely adore what Stefan has done for years. True pioneer in this format, true pioneer. And Stefan was gracious enough to get on Zoom with us, get on the phone with us, and talk about what it would require for us to prepare the music for him to master it to be available on Blu-ray. I won't get into all the details, but the routing, the conception of it, and this is years ago. I mean, ultimately, it became a discrete channel object delivery. It's commonly referred to as an object bed, but it's just channel per, object per speaker. The term is now object bed, but at the time that term hadn't been established, at least not in my world. And that was that's common practice for the classical world. And we mixed this project abroad. He listened over binaural and worked. When you hear those soundscapes and you hear all of those voices and all the detail and just the wild world of it, you will tell right away this was not music that was conceived to come out of two speakers. And it's powerful. I have mixed so much music since doing this record, but still, when someone comes to sit here, usually what happens, I play a couple recent pop mixes, maybe someone in the style that the artist is working with. I work in pretty much any style, which I love. And then usually, if they're really having we have time, I'm going to play them something off this record. And this is always the one that everyone just says, oh my gosh, I've never heard anything like this. And I still listen to it and say, oh my gosh, I haven't heard anything quite like this. And so from a production standpoint, this is creating music from the ground up to be conceived and orchestrated in an immersive space, but not recorded acoustically. This is not an 11-channel array with a choir all around. This is an 11-channel array recording some soundscapes. He also manipulated those using sound particles and things like that outside of the whole Atmos world. Heavy work with Jonathan. Amazing work. And then the vocals, which build up a lot of the record, this sort of non-lyrical vocal textural work that are coming out of all the channels, and the composition is moving around you in that way, is all mono. It's all mono capture. But then he applied those vocals to IRs that he captured in 11 channels from the Rocky Mountains. So there's a congruency there. But the approach here is a very contemporary approach to writing music, specifically for 7+4 channels, the knowledge that that's there. He's not alone. I'm not saying he's the first. I'm not saying that he's the last. I'm just pointing it out there that this is a record I would encourage you to listen to with that context and to conceive of the potential of creating music in one's mind that way. Now, let's talk about what goes next. So this project gets fully mixed here in Atmos. He's listening over binaural. Eventually, we had to work super hard because then it pushed. This record took a long time. COVID hit. He couldn't come here, all those challenges that we all know. I won't bring them back up. So I sent ADMs, and he found sort of a movie theater situation or a soundstage that he could play the ADMs back in. That was like sort of half closed because of COVID. It was very challenging. And that was the first time, after like a year's work, I'd say. My timeline might be a little off there, but first time hearing it. And I'm like sitting on the other line just wondering, how is this going? How's this going to be? And, it worked. It worked great. And he loved it. We loved it. Then this record goes to Stefan Bach at MSM in Munich. He mastered it. I ended up designing it as a double 60 object sort of checkerboard, sort of film style, so that it could all be in one thing, because there's some gapless stuff in there way before the album assembler. Ooh, would have liked that at that time. And I had to work backwards to make sure that all flowed, and it flowed. It was truly all the things I'd ever thought about Pro Tools doing all at once on a 2018 Mac Mini at 96K. I love that computer. He mastered it for Blu-ray. Then it came back to me and I mastered it. I sort of remastered it because the spec is different for Blu-ray than it is for streaming. And at that time, Apple had just started, the headphone stuff, spatial audio had just started, so I had already been working on that with other content. So there's a Blu-ray master, which is one continuous file. Then we have our streaming masters, which now we're all aware of, but at the time, this was early on for an independent, very early on. And then what happens next? Well, Jonathan wanted to have this record in stereo. He wants it to be able to play on the radio. He wants to be able to make a CD and send it out for press and send it out to people who don't have Atmos systems. So we did what I refer to, and he brought this term to my attention, of a supervised stereo fold down. A supervised stereo fold down is turn the render into a 2.0, set your trims the way you want them. And so we were very, very specific about where those trims were. I mean, that was a big deal. And then open up the automation and adjust to make sure that stereo mix sounds exactly as you'd want it to be in stereo. Again, this week, there was a suggestion around the idea that was like just being discovered, and that this approach would eclipse stereo mixing. I'm going to hold on to that thought for a second, because for this record, the reason that we created the stereo from the Atmos is that it would truly be counterproductive and against the intent of the art to have pulled it apart and conceived it in stereo. The stereo truly just needed to be a practical representation of immersive. And that is why we chose to do that. It was not because it couldn't be achieved well in stereo. It was done because it was practical. The cost was already, I mean, that was not a financial adventure for myself or for Jonathan. It was art for art's sake. And Anyways, so we create that stereo fold. And then, as a stereo mastering engineer, I mastered that. I mastered that stereo mix as though it had nothing to do with Atmos, because in that moment, it really doesn't. It now needs to be a stereo file that is playing in the stereo world. And let me stress again, at that time, Atmos, it's just this. It's like we hope one day someone will get to experience this. Amazingly, that two or so years later, it's very practical that I can put it up on a slide and say, hey, go listen to it, and a significant amount of people can. Amazing. But at the time, stereo was just a legitimate practical consideration. So we mastered that. That goes to CD. I also brought those stereo masters back into the Atmos masters for streaming, because for those of you who are stereo mastering engineers, there are things that happen with the right equipment, with the right analog equipment, or digital. I don't want to get into that conversation, but I have a big chain for analog. That's hard to achieve any other way. And so when I brought it back into the Atmos session, there's a little bit of magic there that I actually wanted to sort of chase, so that when they went to streaming and they were going to live together, they could play beautifully together, which has been my philosophy with everything that I do, unless instructed otherwise. Then that same stereo mix got mastered for vinyl, which was, it's not that the master was drastically different, because it wasn't too hot. It's a very dynamic record, but a specific vinyl master. So now this project, which was conceived in one initial Dolby Atmos session and composed for Atmos, composed for 11 channels, and then Atmos just became the run. Quite frankly, he could have, at that time, if it wasn't for Atmos, he was going to go figure out something with IMAX and just skip streaming altogether, or do like a binaural record, or maybe Oro 3D, which is a beautiful format for anyone who hasn't heard it. But Dolby, it all came to light at the right time. So now this Atmos session becomes a vinyl master, dedicated stereo vinyl master, a dedicated CD digital master, which is an Apple digital master on streaming. The ADMs that went to Tidal and Amazon and Apple for their Spatial engine. The full-scale ADM that goes to Dolby True HD on Blu-ray. So all the way from a vinyl up to Blu-ray. And this was early on. And so fun and so challenging to consider that full gamut. I think that's the right word. And then one extra step was, we figured out how to play that Blu-ray back using a CP850 at an AVX theater here in Toronto. And we did the release party in a theater with the screen off. And that's a whole other thing that I'm now obsessed with, that I'll share about later. I'm composing a record of my own. For those of you who don't know me, I mean, my background is as a bassist in the sort of jazz and world music area. Save it for another day, but it'll take its sweet time. But I'm composing a record specifically to be played back in cinema, music in cinema, because of that experience. And having the experience of one Dolby Atmos session, being able to create the deliverables from a vinyl up to a cinematic playback, not an MXF, not in a DCP. We couldn't afford to go there. We had to just use a Blu-ray player, and I plugged it into the, figured out the settings, and I had to be the one in the back to press play for everyone in the theater and go in. But there was no visual content. So it was just screen off. 150 awesome people from here in Toronto got to listen. I hope that, and I'm going to show you the record again. I hope that is a more inspiring and realistic example of what it means to start in Atmos. Starting in Atmos has also, again, it was shared this week as this idea that if I do this, it'll be more efficient. Trust me, there was nothing efficient about the record, about this. It was not about efficiency. And I'm not saying that we efficiency is key to budgets, and budgets are real. I'm not negating that. I work on a wide range of musical content, and everybody knows that there's a wide range of availability in those contexts. And so, do I believe deeply in starting in Atmos? Yes. I think I just proved it with this example. Does all music need to start there? No. So now I'm going to switch to the next one. Barbra Lica, incredible singer, jazz singer, pop singer, R&B singer, just a really deep musician from here in Toronto. Barbra did this record this last year, Imposter Syndrome, also available on all the streaming sites in both stereo and Atmos. The first song that I did for this is called Girls Like Me. Wicked song. Check it out. And her producer for that song, good friend of mine named Joel Vizantine. I remember where I was when he called me. He said, "Hey, we'd love to do the record with you. And we're really, we know about your Atmos thing. Tell us about it." And of course, at first, the first question always has to be, what's the intent? Intent has to drive all of this, all of these decisions. As the world around us is changing so fast, and all I can say is that to navigate the complexities, the technological complexities, the pace of change, for everybody, especially those who are just looking at this for the first time, Dolby Atmos specifically, or Sony 360, hone in on your intent and hold tight to your art. Hold tight to it. Do not let technology drive your art. Let it serve your art. Now, does technology drive art? Of course it does. I'm not negating that. We can have that discussion another time, but you get my sentiment, I hope. So I asked about the intent. Well, the intent is like, this is a stereo record. It's going to CD. It's got to go on the radio. We want a playlist. But like, we also want the Atmos. So I remember in the first conversation I described, now we also talked about budget. I'm not talking about numbers here, but the budget was such that I definitely just first described we should start an Atmos, do a supervised stereo fold down, then let me master that, etc. But for those of you who have done this with an artist, unless that artist is going to get to sit with me here from the very get-go and truly develop a relationship with what immersive audio is, especially on headphones, it's very hard to not let the technology get in the way of the critical production decisions. And so even though the first time that I pulled in those production stems, I opened an Atmos session, I personally made the decision that it was the right thing for this team and our circumstances to mix in stereo, master in stereo, and then do what I refer to as spatial remixing. Whenever the stereo master is done first, which is what I do every day, I work with a number of artists and labels specifically where I'm doing that content. So with this record, I chose myself, despite the fact that it was going to take a bit more time, I'm just going to do this in stereo because that is what Barbra knows. That is what Joel knows. That's what her other producers know. They have their setups at home, and this is how they are going to be able to help me as the stereo mixing engineer get the best mixes possible to get the song to be alive in the way that they conceived it, rather than me forcing a technology upon them that they didn't understand because it was more practical for me. Now, is that always possible? No. Will I always make that decision? It's complicated. But I just want to put this out there because this is a mirror image to the last record. And so sometimes when I say, oh, it should be in 10, I sort of want to give you proof based on my own experiences. Again, just in hopes. I'm hoping that this is helpful to the dialogue right now. So now, what I will say is that when you know what you're doing as a stereo mix engineer and you know it's going to Atmos, you're going to design that session to stem out exactly how you want. So I didn't deliver myself only stereo stems. I delivered myself mono things. I delivered myself dry stuff. I could build the Atmos exactly how I wanted. Now, in my setup, I can use all my analog gear with HDX, whether I'm in Atmos or whether I'm in stereo. So it's not about that. It was mainly about that was what was going to allow the artist to connect with their music, therefore them to give me the right notes so that I could get what they wanted done. So we finished the stereo mix. Then I mastered it. It's a separate process for stereo. Every song that we did on this record, similar thing, different producers for each song. And then the Atmos began. Now, we actually did this record sort of one song at a time because they were being trickled out over a period of time. And so stereo was completely confirmed. And then they came in and they listened to the Atmos. And we all had that thing which we've all experienced of like, oh my goodness, this truly is especially with the Girls Like Me song, like, yeah, this is the most magical version of this song. And so that was a time when I chose to do the exact opposite. And I could see myself doing it again because it also made me make different decisions. There's the huge chicken and the egg situation here of intent, and whatever decision you make of to start it in immersive, to start it in stereo, it makes you make different decisions. And this is where, from a spatial remix standpoint, when I received the stems, songs that were released this week, for instance, Jamie Fine, Lola Brooke, Devin Cole, Crownlands, Josh Ross, LUM, Nikki Yor. The stereo masters that I'm fortunate enough to listen to on a daily basis from these world-class stereo mixers, stereo masters, they're so good. Like, so unbelievably good. And this is, like, I'm just paying respect where respect is due. I work on stereo content. I work as a stereo mastering engineer. When I hear these masters, I'm like, whew. The songs, of course, what matters most, the performances, the music. But those could also be delivered in lots of ways. But the stereo masters themselves, I pull it up and say, wow, what a sound. I'm going to transition this now that I'm... And for me to say, okay, so now I take that, right? I take those stems and I imagine them in my spatial environment, and I've got a whole, a lot of philosophy about that, but that's for another day. I've talked about it before as well. And you can visit my site and hear all sorts of examples. You'll be able to judge for yourself my relationship with the stereo master, specifically in spatial remixing. I have the utmost respect for that stereo master. And so the idea of me making the Atmos master, mixing it, then mastering it, and then printing down a stereo and comparing it to their stereo mix and saying mine's better. It's just backwards thinking for me. Everything has its place. And all I'm going to say is when those songs are delivered the way they are, they feel just right. And my goal in an immersive context is to make them feel just right. So again, intent, different approaches, different effects based on the decisions that you make. Snoop Dogg Doggystyle. This was released within the last month. Right now, I think it's exclusive to Apple. Eventually, it may not be. This record is one that was initially recorded to tape. And anyone who knows anything about the tape days knows that you've got a multi-track tape machine and MPCs all synced, going through a console. Mixing's all happening on the console, then it's being captured to 2-track. All of this, all the mixing, all the punch edits, all the EQ, compression, effects, etc., is of course not captured on the multis. So Snoop's team, who are unbelievable, have kept such great care of all of their content at Death Row. Unbelievable. An honor to work with. They bake the tapes, provide all those stems. And now this is a fascinating process. Again, we're into sort of option 3 of the examples I'm giving you of approaches to production. This is a complete remix because it literally came in unmixed of a record that has a clearly defined legendary stereo master. And so the intent here is very fascinating because it's definitely, from my perspective, just the same as when the Beatles catalog gets done and, Pink Floyd catalog gets done, like these big all the really big catalog stuff. This for me is this. I mean, Doggystyle is a top 10 hip hop record of all time. It's a big one, and so of course there's no doubt in anyone's mind that the intent has to be to honor exactly what it was, which means crazy matching. And I'm not going to go on how much there was, but to match it as closely as possible. As closely as possible. I did my best and worked very hard to mix it and master it to have it reflect what the stereo master is, which ultimately represents the piece, the composition, while also, living in this space and finding my own musical decisions, and then also working with the team to find that balance. And so that is sort of the archival legacy content approach. It can also serve you quite well, and I know there's a lot of engineers who have done this. Take an example of like the Massenberg, Ann Manselli, Michael Romanowski, the mastering engineer, and Eric Schilling, the Alicia record, the whole Alicia catalog that they're doing. There have been beautiful presentations where they've shared the idea of going back to the multis, even when they had stems, going back to the multis and rebuilding it, because it allows you to make your spatial decisions. It allows you to make all the right decisions in the space, while of course knowing that the stereo master is there as a reference. So I take a lot of inspiration from that in my own sort of content like this. And another record that's just like that is Mother, Mother, Oh My Heart. This is a great Canadian band. Really, really cool record. Loved working on it. Received the hard drive. Same situation. Everything was done on the console. So a complete remix. So you can check those records out. So again, another production approach to using Dolby Atmos, where now it becomes a remix tool and an immersive tool, an archival tool. It's fascinating. One thing I'd like to mention is I'd like to give a huge shout out to my studio assistant, Andrew Chung, excellent engineer here in Toronto. He was with me through the thick and thin of getting the Snoop Dogg Doggystyle and the Mother Mother record to where they got to, especially the initial remix stages of getting everything together and some of the complications around working with things from tape and getting into that tonal matching. His work was indispensable and incredible. So thank you, Andrew. This one was not mixed by me. It's mixed by a colleague of mine here in Toronto, unbelievable Atmos engineer, also just unbelievable recording engineer, stereo engineer, good person, Alex Gamble over at Raven Tape Studios. I have had the fortune of mastering Dolby Atmos content for Alex when the arrangement is right. And Alex and I have developed and continue to develop a relationship as friends and as colleagues, but also for him being a mixer and me being a mastering engineer in this format. I'm not going to get into the mastering thing. Save it for, I've already done videos on it, but I really do have a sort of a major update to share at some point, but I'll save it for now. This record, Alex and Selina, Selina, they tracked the record, they produced the record, not specifically initially for immersive, but mixed it first in immersive and went for it. Really cool. Check it out on streaming. Fantastic mix decisions. When mastering it, is like one of the pleasures of mastering other people's Atmos mixes is getting to just get surprised by different decisions that you love. And so this is a record that the similar process to the Jonathan Kawchuk. Comes to me, I master it, we sign off on it on Atmos first. Then the supervised stereo fold happens from the master, gets signed off on by everyone, or little adjustments are made where necessary. Then that gets mastered in stereo. That gets brought back into the Atmos session for me because I want to do my due diligence and just see if there's a little bit of chasing that I want to do on the Atmos side now, because the stereo master's got this strength and beauty to it that happens with glue. Chase that, find ways of getting there, those little subtle, that last 5%, that last 10%. Then this record also got a dedicated vinyl master for full length, and also these little shorts, these short little vinyl releases, like 3-song EP vinyl releases. And So another record that just started in Atmos, not necessarily like Jonathan's, where it wasn't tracked with like multi-channel arrays, or initially the songs weren't necessarily conceived in Atmos, but once Selina became aware of it, she was like, I can't think of not creating this music this way. And so the decisions made that ultimately inform what the stereo is as well are made in that space. And they were together in the same space with Alex doing their thing. And so just another record to sort of check out. So I'm looking at the time, longer video than I had initially intended. But my hope is to have clarified and opened the door to the idea of creating content specifically geared towards immersive production. Of course, the one area that I haven't really covered is like the one that's existed the longest, which is recording at source. We're talking about Morten Lindberg, the big classical recordings, the big ones, like, you know, the idea of having the ensemble in a space around an array and capturing it at source. If you haven't heard it, you have to hear it. You have to understand what that is. I've got a good Blu-ray collection. I've also done recordings of that capacity. They're just, they're not available. So it's heavy. Then there's the approach like Jonathan's of conceiving music and orchestrating it for this environment, and then also being able to use the flexibility of adaptive object-based audio, which is what Dolby Atmos is. It's adaptive object-based audio to now create the deliverables, to go all the way from vinyl up to Blu-ray and to be played back in a cinema. Then there's the idea and the justification with the Barbra Lica record of mixing in stereo first and just making sure that that stem out is robust and totally flexible so that it can just go into Atmos. That also, nowadays, I would just do that all in one session. There's no need to stem it out per se, but at that time it was sort of a technological necessity. But now you can just be in one session and have your stereo and Atmos all at the same time, still mix in stereo first, and then you just don't have to change sessions. You just suddenly you open the objects up and you can fly. If you're efficient about it, it's really not a big deal to stem it out, though. And they wanted stems anyways for production purposes, so it's a necessity regardless. And then there's like the legacy approach of total remixing. And then there's the spatial remix approach. I mean, which is receiving stereo stems, stereo master. Commonly, they're stereo stems, all baked, no mono content in there, and totally realizing some incredible stuff from that. Like, there are so many ways to use this, and it all comes down to intent. And so my hope is that this is spanned enough that it brings some clarity. As to the last point, I guess, this from the day that Apple shared their first video on spatial audio, it was the Zane Lowe thing with Marvin Gaye. I mean, I was so moved and so touched that it was happening, because for me, as you know, at that moment, it's like 4 years of waiting. And it was a big moment. It was a pivotal moment. I love what they did. The one thing that I always wished was just a little different, but I understand why it was done. I get the commercial. I get it. I've never liked it being presented as a competition with stereo. I recognize that I can't just continue to be, blindly optimistic all the time. I recognize that there is that sense of it. I get it. I'm in competition with myself sometimes as a stereo mastering engineer. Like, I get it. But to do it out of that place, to say, I'm going to mix in Atmos so that I don't get someone else to do it, or I'm going to mix in Atmos just because it's a mandatory deliverable. It's not the right reason to be there. And look, if it truly does become a permanent deliverable, an object-based, discrete audio, channel audio, X number of years from now is gone, well, of course, then it has to happen. But for that to be suggested as a reality right now, It's really, it's too far. It's too far for right now. And even for the conceivable future, all I can stress is continue to make music the way that moves you, the way that facilitates the music to become its full potential, to reach its full potential. And then let the technology follow. And I really do think that for a lot of people, that means not everyone needs to work in immersive. Not everyone needs to work in stereo. Like it's for now, I really urge everybody to look at their intent and look at their circumstance and make decisions based on that. And for anybody who just wants to dip their toes into the immersive arena, get a great set of headphones. You can watch on my channel already my review on my Odyssey collection. And work on it that way and reach out for mastering. It's a much more feasible, much more affordable way to go about doing this, especially at the start, especially with this, I don't know, just the amount of pressure that I would imagine somebody could feel based on the energy that was put into this recently is a lot. And I just would encourage everyone to always make these kinds of decisions for the right reasons, which is musical. I'll leave it at that. Please subscribe to stay in touch. www.synthesissound.com. If you want to check out my mixing work, get in touch, please. I've got a whole list there of the artists that I've been working with over the past number of years, and www.immersivemastering.com for the mastering side. Also, at the bottom of this video, I have links to all the records that I just put, as well as links to my own playlists on Apple, Amazon, and Tidal, if you want to just check out a selection. I try to get most of them in there. I missed some, but selection of music I've worked on. Thank you. Thank you, all of the artists, labels, producers, etc., who have trusted me to this date with their music. I cannot thank you enough. And happy mixing, everybody.